Elvis Presley stopped mid-song and stared directly at the drunk man who had just called him a fake. 20,000 people at the International Hotel in Las Vegas fell silent as the king of rock and roll slowly placed his microphone back in the stand. What happened next would become the most talked-about moment in entertainment history, but the full story has never been told until now. It was August 15th, 1970. And Elvis was 3 songs into his midnight show when Harold Hank Morrison, a construction worker from Detroit, stood up in the front row and shouted something that made the entire audience gasp. The incident would be covered up by Colonel Parker's publicity machine for decades, but recently discovered audio recordings and witness testimonials reveal the truth about that legendary Vegas confrontation. The man who challenged Elvis that night wasn't just any drunk troublemaker. Hank Morrison was a Korean War veteran who had lost his son in Vietnam just 6 months earlier. He'd come to Vegas to drink away his pain, spending his dead boy's college fund on whiskey and gambling. But what drove him to stand up and challenge the biggest star in the world was something much deeper than alcohol and grief. "You ain't nothing but a rich boy playing dress-up," Morrison had yelled, his voice cutting through the smoky air of the packed showroom. "My boy died for this country while you were making movies and counting money. You don't know nothing about real life, pretty boy." The audience was stunned into silence. Security started moving toward the heckler, but Elvis raised his hand and stopped them cold. What nobody in that audience knew was that Morrison's challenge hit Elvis exactly where it hurt most. The king had been struggling with his own demons about Vietnam, about staying home while boys his age went off to war, about the guilt that ate at him every night despite his manager's assurances that entertaining the troops was service enough. This drunk stranger had just voiced every self-doubt Elvis had been carrying for years. The audio recording, discovered in 2019 in a storage unit that belonged to a former International Hotel sound engineer, captured every word of what happened next. Elvis didn't get angry, didn't call security, didn't storm off stage like everyone expected. Instead, he did something that would change both men's lives forever and prove why they called him the king of more than just rock and roll. Elvis stepped down from the stage and walked directly to Morrison, who was swaying slightly but still standing defiantly in front of his seat. The 20,000 people in the audience could barely breathe as they watched their idol approach this hostile stranger. Security guards tensed, ready to intervene, but Elvis's steady hand gestures kept them at bay. The showroom was so quiet you could hear ice clinking in glasses 3 rows back. "What's your boy's name?" Elvis asked, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the wireless microphone he still wore. Morrison, caught off guard by the gentle question, stammered for a moment before answering. Tommy Morrison. He was 19. Elvis nodded slowly, and then he did something that shocked everyone in that room. He put his arm around the drunk man's shoulders and guided him toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis announced to the crowd, "we got ourselves a Gold Star father here tonight. Mr. Morrison's son Tommy gave his life for our country in Vietnam. I think we owe this man and his boy our respect." The audience erupted in applause. But Elvis wasn't finished. He helped Morrison up onto the stage, steady hands supporting the grieving father who was now crying openly. What happened over the next 37 minutes became the stuff of legend, though Colonel Parker worked overtime to keep it out of the newspapers. Elvis spent the rest of his show talking with Morrison, sharing stories about fathers and sons, about duty and sacrifice, about the weight of expectations and the pain of loss. The king opened his heart to a complete stranger in front of 20,000 witnesses, creating a moment of human connection that transcended celebrity and stardom. Morrison told Elvis about Tommy's childhood, about how the boy had learned to play guitar trying to sound like his idol, about the letters from Vietnam where Tommy wrote about listening to Elvis records in the jungle to remind him of home. Elvis listened to every word, nodding, asking questions, treating this grieving father with the same respect he'd show any dignitary or fellow performer. Then Elvis did something unprecedented in his career. He took off his signature gold chain, the one given to him by his mother Gladys before she died, and placed it around Morrison's neck. "This is for Tommy," he said into the microphone, "and for every boy who didn't make it home." The audience was in tears, many of them standing and applauding through their emotions. But the moment that really stunned those 20,000 people came when Elvis asked Morrison if he wanted to sing something for his son. The drunk, grief-stricken construction worker shook his head, saying he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. But Elvis persisted with that famous charm. "How about we sing something together?" the king suggested. For Tommy. What followed was the most unlikely duet in music history. Elvis and this broken-hearted father sang "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother" together, their voices mixing in a way that seemed to heal something in both men. Morrison's voice was rough and untrained, but it carried the weight of genuine emotion that complemented Elvis's polished delivery perfectly. The audience sang along, creating a moment of unity that none of them would ever forget. The song choice wasn't random. Earlier in their conversation, Morrison had mentioned that Tommy used to sing that song around the house, saying it reminded him of his army buddies. Elvis had picked up on that detail and suggested it, showing the kind of emotional intelligence that made him more than just an entertainer. It made him a healer. After the song, Elvis invited Morrison to stay on stage for the rest of the show. The construction worker sat in a chair beside the piano, occasionally adding comments or sharing memories when Elvis asked. The king dedicated every song to Tommy Morrison and all the boys who didn't come home, turning what should have been a typical Vegas show into something approaching a memorial service. The audience that night included celebrities, high rollers, and tourists from around the world, but they all became part of something bigger than entertainment. They witnessed the king of rock and roll at his most human, most genuine, most vulnerable. Many of them later said it was the most moving performance they'd ever seen, not because of the music but because of the humanity on display. Among those in attendance was Frank Sinatra, who had come to catch Elvis's late show after finishing his own performance at the Sands. Sinatra, who had initially dismissed Elvis as a flash in the pan, watched the entire interaction with growing respect. Later he would tell friends that he'd never seen a performer handle a hostile situation with such grace and compassion. "The kid's got more class than I gave him credit for," Sinatra admitted to his entourage. Also in the audience that night was Tom Jones, the Welsh singer who had become Elvis's close friend and frequent Vegas companion. Jones later described watching Elvis transform a potential disaster into a moment of healing as the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed on a stage. He said it reminded him why Elvis was called the King, not because of his voice or his looks, but because of his heart. Even the international hotel staff, who had seen thousands of shows and dealt with every kind of disruption imaginable, were moved by what they witnessed. Cocktail waitresses stopped serving drinks, dealers abandoned their tables, and security guards found themselves wiping away tears as they watched Elvis treat Morrison with such dignity and respect. The moment became a turning point not just for Morrison and Elvis but for everyone who was there. They had come expecting entertainment and left having experienced something profound about human connection, about the power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. Many of them would spend years telling the story, trying to capture the magic of that night for people who weren't fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. Morrison later told friends that Elvis probably saved his life that night. The veteran had been planning to drink himself to death, spending Tommy's college money until it was gone and then finding a permanent way to join his son. But Elvis's kindness, his genuine respect for Tommy's sacrifice, gave Morrison a reason to keep living. The king had turned a heckler into a friend and possibly prevented a suicide. The international hotel management was initially furious about the disruption, worried that Elvis's spontaneous gesture would set a precedent for other troublemakers. But the standing ovation that lasted for 12 minutes after the show ended convinced them that they had witnessed something special. The audience that night talked about it for years, many calling it the greatest live performance they'd ever seen. Colonel Parker, however, was less impressed. He worried that Elvis's display of vulnerability would damage his carefully crafted image as an untouchable superstar. The colonel made sure that no official recording of the incident was ever released, and he pressured the hotel to destroy any footage they might have captured. For decades, the story survived only in the memories of those who were there. The friendship between Elvis and Morrison continued long after that night. The king arranged for the construction worker to receive counseling through a charity that helped Gold Star families, and he quietly paid for Tommy's headstone when he learned the family couldn't afford one. Morrison became a regular guest at Elvis's Vegas shows, always given a front row seat and always acknowledged by the king during the performance. Morrison's presence seemed to ground Elvis in a way that surprised everyone who knew the performer. The king would often dedicate songs to Tommy Morrison, and he kept a photo of the young soldier in his dressing room. Friends said that Morrison's grief helped Elvis process his own guilt about Vietnam, giving him permission to honor the sacrifice of others without diminishing his own contributions to American culture. The audio recording that surfaced in 2019 also revealed something else remarkable about that night. During a quiet moment while his band was taking a break, Elvis can be heard asking Morrison about his own father, about how the loss affected his family, about whether Tommy had children of his own. The king was genuinely interested in this stranger's life, treating him not as a disruption but as a person worthy of respect and attention. Morrison's daughter, now in her 60s, still has the gold chain that Elvis gave her father that night. She said her dad wore it every day until he died in 1995, and that he never stopped talking about the night the king of rock and roll treated him like royalty. The chain became a family heirloom, passed down with the story of how Elvis Presley proved that true greatness comes from how you treat people when you don't have to. The incident also changed how Elvis approached his live performances. After that night, he was more likely to acknowledge audience members, to dedicate songs to people celebrating birthdays or anniversaries, to make his shows feel more like conversations than concerts. The king had learned that his greatest power wasn't his voice or his moves, it was his ability to make people feel seen and valued. This shift in Elvis's performing style didn't go unnoticed by his fellow entertainers. Dean Martin, who caught one of Elvis's shows a few weeks after the Morrison incident, was amazed by the king's new approach to audience interaction. "The kid's always been talented," Martin told friends, "but now he's got something else. He's got heart that shows. Makes you feel like you're in his living room instead of a showroom." The change also affected Elvis's song choices. He began incorporating more meaningful material into his sets, songs that spoke to loss, sacrifice, and the complexities of American life. "In the Ghetto," a song he'd recorded but rarely performed live, became a regular part of his Vegas shows. Elvis would often dedicate it to all the boys who didn't make it home, clearly thinking of Tommy Morrison and others like him. Some critics initially dismissed this new direction as Elvis getting too serious or losing his edge, but audiences loved it. They responded to the authenticity, to the sense that they were seeing the real Elvis rather than just another polished performance. Ticket sales actually increased as word spread about the king's more personal, more emotionally engaging shows. Security footage from the International Hotel, discovered during renovations in 2003, shows Elvis and Morrison talking privately after the show for almost an hour. They sat in Elvis's dressing room, sharing coffee and continuing their conversation about fathers, sons, war, and music. The king treated this grieving stranger like an old friend, proving that his kindness wasn't just a performance for the audience. The story of Elvis and the drunk heckler spread through Vegas like wildfire, despite Colonel Parker's efforts to suppress it. Other performers began trying to recreate similar moments of spontaneous connection with their audiences, but none of them had Elvis's natural gift for reading people and responding to their needs. The king's handling of Morrison became a masterclass in how true stars behave when faced with adversity. Within days, other Vegas performers were talking about the incident backstage at various hotels. Tom Jones tried to recreate something similar during his own show at Caesar's Palace, inviting an audience member on stage to share a story, but it felt forced and awkward compared to Elvis's natural response. Wayne Newton, who had witnessed the original incident, told fellow entertainers that what made Elvis special wasn't that he planned the gesture, but that he didn't plan it at all. "When you always not salves peas in fellas por dels." The ripple effects extended beyond Las Vegas entertainment circles. Music industry executives began encouraging their artists to be more authentic and spontaneous with audiences, though most missed the point entirely. You can't manufacture the kind of genuine human connection that Elvis showed that night. It has to come from something real inside the performer. Casino managers throughout Vegas also took notice of how the incident had affected their customers. Patrons who witnessed Elvis's treatment of Morrison were telling the story to friends who came to Vegas specifically hoping to experience something similar. The International Hotel reported a significant increase in bookings for Elvis's shows, with many guests specifically requesting front-row seats in case something special happens again. Even the Las Vegas Tourism Board began quietly promoting the city's entertainment as more than just glitz and glamour. They started emphasizing the human moments and real connections that could happen in Vegas showrooms, though they were careful not to directly reference the Morrison incident due to Colonel Parker's continued efforts to control the narrative. Years later, when Morrison was interviewed for a documentary about Elvis that was never completed, he said the most amazing thing about that night wasn't the kindness or the attention, it was how natural it all felt. Elvis didn't act like he was doing me a favor, Morrison explained. He acted like I was doing him one by sharing Tommy's story. Made me feel like my boy's life mattered to someone besides just his old man. The 20,000 people who witnessed that confrontation became part of Elvis lore, each of them carrying the story forward and helping to cement the King's reputation as more than just an entertainer. They had seen him at his most human, most vulnerable, most genuine, and they never forgot it. Many of them said it changed how they thought about celebrity, about fame, about what it really means to be great. Today, the audio recording of that night is considered one of the most important documents in Elvis's legacy, not for its musical content but for what it reveals about the man behind the legend. It shows a performer who understood that his real job wasn't just to entertain people, it was to make them feel less alone in the world. That night in Vegas, Elvis Presley proved why they called him the King. This was only one untold story of legends who shaped history. If this journey moved you, don't let it end here. Hit the like button to keep their voices alive, drop a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss the hidden truths behind the legends, because their legacy is far from over.